Welcome to His Book, Her Book, the conversational podcast where a horror-obsessed husband and his genre-hopping wife try to understand each other's reading choices, clash tastes, and stay happily married through it all. Together, we'll dive into stories from opposite ends of the bookshelf, laughing, debating, recommending, and occasionally roasting each other's picks. Because in this relationship, there's one guarantee. The only thing scarier than his novels is my TBR shelf. This is His Book, Her Book, hosted by German and Jacqui. Sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy the literary chaos.
Hey guys, we're back for another episode of His Book, Her Book. We're your host, German.
And Jacqui.
And last episode, we gave our take on multiple reads from the same author.
Yes.
This episode, we're discussing isolation-themed reads. And Jacqui, what's your take on isolation novels?
When we chose this topic, I spent some time thinking about why I love this theme and what makes it such a popular underlying subject for novelists. And I don't know, I find these books have quite a bit of psychological depth, really strong character studies, an emphasis on atmosphere, and if anyone is paying attention, those are basically my main reading kinks. So isolation as a theme, though, I think is pretty loose. This can be interpreted as physical, social, emotional, even self-imposed. I had a lot of fun choosing what direction to go in with my recommendations and realizing that so many books I love could really be considered for this episode. Honestly, I think isolation is probably one of the most enduring, versatile themes in fiction, like across all genres. And it's captivating to readers because it's relatable, also maybe a little frightening. We've all experienced loneliness and emotional distance. I definitely think these books attract a certain type of reader, as they tend to be a bit dystopian in nature. And that reader is me. Hi. That being said, I know I sound like a broken record, but it was very difficult to narrow down just a few favorites. And I definitely feel like I'm going off script today because my choices are more well-known, popular picks. So if listeners have read these and loved them as much as me, let's be friends. What about you, German? What was your main thought process in narrowing down your isolation picks?
All right. Well, you said a lot of what I agree with already.
Of course.
For me, talking horror specifically, but just, I think you said this too, just like any other fiction genre, horror can deal with isolated locations, characters in isolation, or something else, as long as the theme deals with isolation.
I think a lot about, like, for horror, the isolation of, like, descending into madness too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's perfect. Yeah, perfect. The Shining, for example.
Yeah.
Descending into
Come
madness.
Closer.
Come Closer. Well. Yes. Which I almost picked for this. Well, shoot, where was I? But my choices this week happen to both take place in isolated spaces.
Nice. Cool.
And one of them, my first one, probably in the most isolated place ever. Maybe not free space.
Interesting.
But, it also deals with personal isolation in the main character. And that first choice is The Deep by Nick Cutter, which was published in 2015. Jacqui, synopsis?
Here we go.
All right.
The Deep follows veterinarian Luke Nelson as he descends 8 miles into the Mariana Trench to find his brother Clayton, a brilliant but troubled molecular biologist who has gone silent while researching a cure to a memory-erasing global plague called the Gets. Instead, he encounters primordial malevolent forces. Or is that a primordial malevolent force? Making me say those words twice.
I think
Evil.
It might be up to Louise. So, something I caught on to just recently is that Nick Cutter seems to like using isolation as a horror tool for some of his novels. The troupe takes place on a remote Canadian island, Most of Little Heaven is set in the remote backwoods of New Mexico. And I haven't read The Dorians yet, his new novel, but I hear it has a remote and isolated island as its main location.
That's interesting.
Isolation. So I had a few choices with him, but I already talked about The Troop back in episode 2.
I remember that one.
And let's be honest, you can't get more isolated than 36,000 feet below the ocean.
How many Sears Towers is this?
I'll come back to you on that one. With the Deep. Pretty appropriate title there.
Yeah.
The book takes place in the near future or on an alternate contemporary reality, but I don't think there's an actual year given. The main character is Luke, and I found him really likable. Maybe it's because he's a veterinarian and he seems to love animals like I do, or maybe it's because he had some rough going ons in life, and I felt bad for him. He grew up with Clayton, his brilliant but strange older brother. They were raised by a mother who was mostly horribly abusive to the both of them, but even more so to Clayton, which explains a lot of why he is how he is. But the most tragic thing that happens to Luke is when his son, Zach, goes missing. Cutter does a really good job here making the disappearance something that parents can relate to. Luke is playing a game with his son of hide and seek when Zach suddenly disappears. And this event, as you can imagine, also ends Luke's marriage. So you get real life horrors, not kidnapping or disappearance, but this book also features plenty of supernatural horror. Once Luke and Al, a Navy pilot, submerge into complete darkness to find his brother, it's all science fiction, cosmic, body, and isolation horror. When they finally arrive, the research station, called the Trieste, is a mess. There's a dead scientist, bloody writing on the walls, and a dog all alone and scared.
Uh-oh.
I know. You know where I'm going. A big trigger warning here. I personally purposely skipped almost a whole chapter due to LB, which is the dog, his ultimate storyline. So just big trigger warning there. And also when Luke does finally find his brother Clayton's even more erratic and weird and secretive than he was before. When the story's location becomes the Trieste, down here is really where the isolation kicks in. That being the theme of this week's episode, let me tell you how this book uses it to bring the horror. The obvious that we're about 7 miles deep in an isolated, quote-unquote, stable research base. Oh, and Jacqui, I found that it's actually about 25 Sears Towers below the ocean.
Interesting.
That's a lot of Sears Towers. But even before this, the trip down to the station with Luke and Al is harrowing. They're in this tiny submersible that they barely fit in. And there's a moment where we see the last of the sun, and from that point on, it's just lights out, complete darkness for the rest of the trip, full of unease and dread. Noises, things they're seeing or not seeing. But
I know you love unease and dread.
Yes, I was going to go back to that. Unease and dread are probably my 2 favorite elements of horror because just, it kind of keeps you there and it almost teases without going the whole way. But Duck Cutter does a top job in the description and putting you there experiencing and seeing or not seeing with the characters. We go from isolation in the ship to isolation in the station. When they're there, it's dark. There's strange noises. Many times Luke finds himself alone or dealing with small spaces. It's very claustrophobic. The physical isolation is just crazy. Then, a more subdued but just as dread-inducing horror is Luke's psychological or emotional feeling of isolation. When I picked this book, the obvious draw was that it takes place in the most isolated place, the bottom of the ocean. Isolation. I was like, oh, good, easy pick. But as I started putting together my notes, I remember that this guy, Luke, has been dealing with his own kind of detachment or loneliness for a lot of his life. When he was a kid, Clayton mostly ignored or couldn't be bothered with him. It didn't seem he had many friends, and he did not want to spend any time, and I don't blame him, with his crazy and abusive mother. Then when he's probably at his happiest, finally at the happiest part of his life, with his wife and kid, his son is taken or vanishes, and soon after that, his marriage ends. Luke's alone. He even ends up kind of isolating himself at the beginning of the novel He's working or volunteering in Guam. So with the deep, what do we have? We have a lonely guy. We got a floating base. We have a tiny submersible and a research station at the bottom of the ocean. And the tragedy and trauma that Luke is dealing with, which I believe adds up to a great isolation horror novel for your library.
This one sounds really good. I think my hesitation with Nick Cutter is that every time you describe trigger warnings, you talk about body horror. And so I don't know, who would you recommend this one to?
So I would, first and foremost, fans of isolation horror, like The Shining and Frankenstein, the isolated character there. But also, what you said, people who like body horror.
Ooh, who do people like? I don't know. Do people? I guess people do. Do you like body horror?
I do sometimes. For me personally, not when it involves a dog or an animal, which happens a couple of times in his books. But fans of body horror, science fiction, cosmic horror, so H.P. Lovecraft-ish, I think will really like this book. But yeah, I really liked how he dealt with isolation in spaces and in the person, in the character.
Yeah, you did well by this theme, I would say, with that one, for sure.
That's the start. And what's your first book?
Well, I too believe that I understood the assignment on this one. My first book is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman, published in French in 1995 and then translated into English by Raj Schwartz in 1997. Ready to read the synopsis?
I am.
All right.
This is one I've read. It was great. A young girl raised in an underground cage with 39 other imprisoned women escapes after their guards mysteriously vanish. Having never known freedom or the world above, she wanders a barren post-apocalyptic landscape, piecing together fragments of a lost civilization. The novel follows her solitary search for meaning, identity, and the connection in a world emptied of human history and human touch.
Well, I would be remiss if I did not talk about what has to be the quintessential masterpiece of isolation novels, at least in the most literal, overt sense.
I have to agree.
This book is haunting. It's beautiful. It's so heartbreaking. And every time I read it, I have more questions for the author. It is one of my absolute favorite books. It's one I recommend aggressively. If you are part of my close circle, you have read this book. German, you mentioned.
Yep.
You have read this book.
Includes me.
So, as the synopsis states, the novel begins with a group of women imprisoned underground, watched by silent guards with no explanation for why they're there. And among them is our unnamed main character, a young girl who, unlike her fellow prisoners, has no knowledge of the world outside her captivity. Because of this, the narrator is separated from humanity in a way few literary characters are. Her loneliness really stems from her lack of shared experiences, and therefore she struggles to connect with the other women. She has no memories of friendships, no cultural references, no sense of what a normal human existence looks like. So even surrounded by other women, there's this huge disconnect between her and them. And I love how Hartman explores isolation as something more than solitude. The narrator is constantly searching for understanding. She wants to know who she is, where she came from, why this is all happening. And if the reader is also anticipating the answers to these questions, don't expect them. Honestly, I think the lack of resolve is one of the novel's most powerful features. And I would not consider this to be a spoiler. I honestly think it's best going into this book without such expectations. I remember while you were reading this book, you kept asking me, are we going to figure this out? Are we going to learn why?
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Most stories promise revelations. So, they build mysteries, they eventually explain them. This author does something much more unsettling. She intentionally denies us resolution, and we are left wondering, how does a person define themselves in the absence of humanity? So existential. One thing I really appreciated is that Hartman doesn't frame isolation as purely destructive. The narrator's loneliness causes pain, of course, but it also shapes her curiosity and resilience. It makes her less in need of a companionship or community, which really strengthens her ability to survive psychologically outside any sense of community. While reading this book, you definitely grapple with the same sort of uncertainty the narrator is experiencing. You change with her as she ages, and along with her, you transition from curious and hopeful to resigned, ultimately accepting of the fact that you, like her, will never know the reasons behind her circumstance. And it's so important to emphasize the why is not the point here. The real story is in how our main character pushes forward and finds meaning in an existence in which the why is never revealed. This is a book that really makes you take a deep breath and kind of contemplate uncomfortable questions about what gives us meaning, what do we build our identity from, and essentially what makes us human. It's a lot to unpack. All right. Who would I recommend this book to? Definitely fans of dystopian fiction, readers who are comfortable with stories that don't have full resolutions, people who like reflective, maybe more philosophical fiction. Obviously, strong character development, unsettling atmosphere. This is all done perfectly in this novel. Again, 5-star, brilliant read for me. I think about it all the time. I definitely love to hear what others think. When I see people talk about this book on social media, I don't think I've ever seen a negative review. It seems that everybody who reads this book, it like leaves something with them. They take something from it. I've had people who do not prefer dystopian stories still really completely fall in love with this book. And I think that says it all. So if you haven't read it, read it. And if you've read it, maybe read it again.
I think a short note from me was I went in, like you said, thinking, I was like, wait, why is this happening? And when am I going to find out? And who is she and who are they and who are the guards and why is everybody gone? I'm not giving anything away. And then I realized that, like you said, it wasn't about that. It's about more.
You have to get to that place.
You have to get that, but for a while, I was like, I need a resolution. Who are these people? Is everybody hiding? What's going on?
A unique way, I think, to frame a story for sure is, leaving us with questions, being comfortable leaving us with questions, because she's also just giving us such a beautiful, in-depth character study. Yeah. And again, forcing us to ask ourselves questions about our own existence and humanity.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of it. I always want, not always, but I'm looking for the neat ending. Everything's tied. I was like, okay, that's what happened. And here you kind of don't know.
Yeah, a different type of resolution, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, German, give us your next isolation pick.
All right. This is one of my favorites. The next book in our isolation picks is The Fisherman by John Langan, published in 2016. Synopsis, Jackie? Yeah.
All right. Two widowers, Abe and Dan, bond over fishing in upstate New York as a way of coping with grief. When Dan pushes to try a remote, hard-to-find spot called the Dutchman's Creek, Abe reluctantly agrees, but not before a diner cook named Howard tells them the dark history behind it. What begins as a quiet, moving story about loss and friendship spirals into cosmic horror once the two men reach the creek and discover exactly why it should have stayed a secret. Sounds good.
Yeah, Abe should not have agreed to go to Dutchman's Creek. So I had this book on my list for a while, and I didn't know too much about it purposely. To be honest, the title drew me in, and also that there's this really cool cover art, kind of dark, stormy shore, like an old, I don't know enough about art, but an old sort of painting, very ominous looking. And I just kind of found that intriguing. And when I read it, I come to find that it's really a story within a story. And those two stories kind of come together in the climax of the book. Excuse me. I thought this worked because it was so well done by Langan. One story, the main story, takes place in the present, and it's a story about loss. You have the main character, who's Abe, and his wife dies after a battle with cancer. And then his coworker, Dan, loses his wife and kids in a horrible, tragic car accident. This leads to their friendship as Abe kind of befriends Dan by asking him to come fishing. Abe sees Dan at the office every day and sees that he's going through this horrible, deep depression. And he hopes that Dan could get the same sort of feeling of peace, of escape, of solace that Abe has been experiencing when he's going on these fishing trips. That, it's kind of finally lifted him out of his depression for a bit. So this works for a while. But then Dan gets this unexplained need to go fishing at this place called Dutchman's Creek.
Is it really unexplained? Or do they explain it?
Yeah, they do explain it. But at first he's like, hey, let's go to Dutchman's Creek. And he's like, why Dutchman's Creek? Where'd you find this place? And he kind of won't talk about it. We'll later see that it's this hard to find place or fishing hole for a reason. Abe finally relents, and that leads us into the story within our first story. The guys stop at this diner, and when the owner hears they're going to Dutchman's Creek, he goes into what's called, what I would call a historic cautionary tale, and urges them not to go. I won't get into it too much, but it's probably my favorite section of the book. It's a tale of immigrant families coming into the Esopus Valley in upstate New York in the early 20th century and how they built the reservoir. But being a cautionary tale, it's also steeped with legend and sorcery and tragedy similar to Abe and Dan's, and with the horror that wrong decisions can bring. Now, back to the present, Dan won't be denied. So even after the story and after the warning, he and Abe head to Dutchman's Creek. I'm going to leave it there, but bad things happen. Now, before I get into the isolation framing and the fisherman, there's something I didn't know to expect and really loved while reading this book. It's how it's told because of how it's written, and cheers to Langan for this. I felt like I was sitting at a campfire or relaxing on the porch with Abe having a beer as he was telling his story to just me. It made the reading that much more engaging because you kind of feel, or I kind of felt like, oh, he's just talking to me and he's having this, I guess, one-way conversation, but it just made it more personal, I guess, for lack of a better term of it. And I had to say that before moving on. But the episode is about isolation. And I think we get two versions from the fisherman. First and the most obvious would have, let's say, the tangible part. The geographical isolation of the fishing location, including, actually, particularly Dutchman's Creek in the main story. And I'll say the fantastical isolation in both Abe's story and the nestled story. In the case of Abe and Dan, the fishing spots at first bring a sense of peace and of friendship, but for Dan, things turn to isolation becomes not of this world and kind of almost inescapable. For Dan, the normal social checks aren't there anymore to slap him back to reality. In the nestled story, it's similar, but the isolation goes deeper into the fantastical realm, and there's barely escape for the characters there. I got a deep sense of sort of Lovecraft horror, cosmic horror in that story. The other version of isolation here is the one that comes with loss. Before Abe befriends Dan, he's a lonely guy. He's been drinking, pulling away from normal life, isolating himself from his friends and family. When he decides to give fishing a try, it's still, in isolation. He goes by himself and doesn't interact too much with the other people he sees there fishing. And he kind of doesn't really make an effort to interact anyway. The novel doesn't get into it too much, but because Abe's experienced the pain that comes with loss of his wife, who he loved more than anything, he may not want to get close to anyone and risk losing them. And then when he finally invites Dan fishing, it's been over a decade since his wife has passed. Now, two things about this book I want to tell the readers. One is that the novel spends a good amount of time on Abe and Dan's grief and relationship before any of the scares show up. And I was fine with this. It was an intriguing story. And because it's told to you by Abe, I felt the need to be present and to get the full tale. But just know you may get a good number of pages and think, wait, I thought this was a horror book. I thought the same thing, but Langan almost lulls you into the grief story before bringing the horror. The other note is that the story within a story, or the nesting doll story, I like that term, also takes up a big chunk of the book. At points, it almost feels like you're reading a separate story and you start to wonder what has happened to the other one. But I love both stories. I love the lore and legend. And I caught hints there that alluded to what's coming when we head back to Abe and Dan's story. So I'd call it kind of a backstory, historical backstory. Now, who would I recommend this to? I really enjoyed this book. I love the storytelling aspect of it, and I appreciated the tale within a tale. And it is scary too. So I'd recommend this to fans of horror, grief horror, in the vein of, let's say, like Pet Sematary. And if you enjoy slow dread and that buildup, you're going to love this book. I really enjoyed it.
That sounds like a good one. It sounded, honestly, in that description, like it would have been 1,000-pager. And I just looked it up and it's 266 pages.
Yeah,
so I don't know how he fit
the pacing,
all those stories into 266 pages. So that is impressive.
It is. It does. It feels like it's a lot. Even when I was reading it, I was like, when like I said, there's a grief story at first, and that seems to go on for quite a while. And then the nestled story also seems to go on for quite a while. And not in like its sense it drags. It feels like a lot in a small space. Yeah, it's like it's very dense. Like you learn a lot, but he did a great job putting both those stories together and then, bring the climax together. So just if you start reading this book and you feel like, oh, wait, this is a little slow, stay with it because it's totally worth it.
Or that it gets confusing.
Yeah.
It goes to a different story.
Yeah, and it'll catch up. It'll catch up. They do meet in the middle.
So two things I want to mention.
Mm-hmm.
First, I really liked what you said about almost like a subgenre of horror, grief horror.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah. I don't think I made that up, but yeah, I like the term.
And as far as horror level in terms of like gore, I'm not that familiar with exactly what cosmic horror means. I think I've probably asked you this 100 times, just never like.
Yeah, and it's almost like I can't describe. Like I know it, but I can't describe it. Like
okay.
Very H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu kind of stuff.
Yeah, that
cultish.
means nothing to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so like gore, body horror, is this something that I would enjoy?
There's gore more in a sense of body horror, but in a you're gonna be like, wait a second, I don't know, in a cosmic sort of fantastical sort of way, like a creature-ish sort of way.
Okay.
There's a little bit of other kinds of horror too, in the sense when they talk about Dan's accident, tragic accident with his wife and kids and how they died. That's gory, but in this sort
warnings.
of yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't think anything that you wouldn't be able to handle. But it is, if you're cool with fantastical stuff, then you'll be okay.
All right, sounds interesting.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jackie, time to move on to your next book.
All right, my next pick is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, published in 2010.
All right.
Synopsis?
Yes. All right. Kathy H. looks back on her childhood at Halsham, an unusual boarding school where children are taught to value creativity and told they are special. As she grows up alongside her friends Ruth and Tommy, Kathy begins to sense that the world around them is not what it seems. Their friendships, jealousies, quiet hopes unfold against the unsettling mystery about their purpose and the future that awaits them.
Thank you. All right. Honestly, based on these two picks, this episode could have been about dystopian fiction. Unlike with I Who Have Never Known Men, it is very difficult to discuss much of the plot beyond this vague synopsis without really giving away too much. I went into this book totally blind, and I'm so happy that I did. So I want the same for any listener who chooses to read this. Basically, The main reason behind our character's isolation cannot be revealed, which maybe in itself would be enticing enough to read this one. I definitely thought of this book like immediately when we chose to go with this theme. Isolation here is not as blatant as with I Who Have Never Known Men, though I would argue devastating nonetheless. From the very beginning, there is like this invisible boundary around our characters' lives. They can dream and hope, they can imagine different futures, but those futures will never be truly available to them. This kind of isolation feels especially tragic because it's so close to freedom. They can see the world, they just can't fully enter it. The loneliness Kathy and Ruth and Tommy share doesn't come from being physically alone, but more from knowing that nobody else can fully share their experience. They are existing in a reality that separates them from the rest of the world. People on the outside depend on them, benefit from them, make decisions about their lives, but never see them as equals. And this creates a sort of emotional alienation that just permeates the entire novel. I know isolation is the theme today, but this story is so beautifully developed. Isolation is like a doorway into several equally rich underlying messages. And I love underlying themes. Memory is one of the novel's most powerful emotional engines. The entire story is told through Kathy's recollections. She's constantly revisiting moments and reinterpreting conversations, and in a way, clinging to the past to make sense of her life. Memory becomes a sort of resistance against loss and like a form of self-preservation. Ishiguro addresses fate and free will, which I think are great companion themes to isolation. The characters make choices throughout the novel, yet their overall futures are predetermined. The author is less interested in whether we can control our destinies and more focused on how the characters live within the limits imposed on them. I feel like I'm giving too much away, yet at the same time being like annoyingly vague. I don't know. I hope this strikes enough curiosity for listeners to pick this one up. In the end, I promise you'll thank me for the ambiguity. Truly. All right. To close it out, this book has a very gentle, reflective tone about it. I would describe it as meditation on morality, friendship, memory, and the meaning of life. The characters are isolated from society, but in confronting that isolation, they end up reflecting the experiences all of us share. Loving people we can't keep, facing a future we can't control, and searching for purpose in the time that we're given. Sounds a little bleak. I would suggest this book to the same readers who would enjoy I Who Have Never Known Men. This is the same kind of quiet, unsettling vibe. Again, very character driven, but also for this book, readers interested in bioethics or speculative science. That might be another little mini giveaway. And just to take a moment to reflect upon these two books, I was just thinking about similarities between them when we were putting this episode together. And both authors tell their stories through the lenses of female characters who are in many ways shaped by their confinement and lack of agency. Both novels address the philosophical question of what it means to be human. More specifically, in I Who Have Never Known Men, what it means to be human without society, and in Never Let Me Go, what it means within an unjust society. In the end, as the reader, we're given very different yet equally satisfying results. I think these two books would be friends. I don't think you've read this
I have not read this.
And I know there has been a movie adaptation that surprisingly I never watched. So maybe
I might
that'll
have to
be,
check it out.
yeah, I'd be interested.
Speaking of that, The Fisherman is being made into a movie right now too.
Oh, cool.
I
Do you know when
know.
that one's coming out?
I don't. I want to say next year sometime. I hope.
Okay.
But
I will read it before then.
Yeah, I had to mention that. And Jacqui, you had one more, right?
Well, yes, I was very inspired by the fact that both of your isolation stories took place on the water.
They did.
And I also wanted to talk about a book that was a little less known, or at least on Goodreads, significantly less rated than my last two books. And that is Beyond the Sea by Paul Lynch. This one was published in 2019.
All right. I got a
Take it
synopsis
away.
here. I do. Fishermen Bolivar and Hector set sail from their South American village, but soon find themselves cast adrift in the Pacific Ocean by a sudden storm. As the days pass and no rescue materializes, the two men must come to terms with their environment and each other, if they are to survive. Part gripping survival story, part fearless existential parable. This novel is a stark meditation on isolation, endurance, and the fragile boundary between hope and despair.
Nice. Thank you. I just love this author. Paul Lynch also wrote Prophet Song, which was one of my favorite books. One of the books I definitely gushed over into our first episode. So I think, any excuse to talk more about his books makes me happy. But this really is such a perfect showcase, too, of isolation. As German, you noted in the synopsis, we have two fishermen lost at sea. And from that very simple concept, we are gifted with a profound exploration of isolation, mortality, and really what remains of a person when everything has been stripped away. And I love how Lynch portrays isolation as like a force, or more like a parasite that infects the characters' minds. As the days stretch into weeks and into months, the characters' psychological states start to alter and diverge. So Bolivar retreats into like a stoic endurance, determined to survive through sheer will. I definitely feel like I related more to him in that sense, while Hector drifts towards visions and dreams and a more like religious interpretation of their ordeal. The novel kind of becomes a study of two minds unraveling in different ways, one through a kind of grim practicality and the other through a spiritual surrender. Throughout this book, there is an underlying sense that the characters are confronting mysteries larger than themselves as time at sea starts to blur the boundary between reality and illusion. Bolivar and Hector drift between dreams and memories and hallucinations, which kind of act as mechanisms of self-reflection as they are forced to reconcile with pasts, like mistakes they've made, choices they regret. It's such an intimate examination of the psyche stripped bare. And that being said, I have to mention Lynch's writing. His prose is lyrical and evocative. There are so many passages I would reread simply because they were just so beautiful, and I love beautiful writing. His sentences are rhythmic and chant-like, but they describe hunger and fear and exhaustion and despair with this brutal accuracy. Overall, Beyond the Sea is just a masterclass in isolation as a catalyst for psychological collapse. I think this book would be friends with your last book. Who would I
they're
recommend?
fishermen.
Yeah. I would recommend this book to people that like a quick read. This is kind of a snack. It's under 200 pages. I actually just reread it for this episode, and it's, just a fast one. The book is also, my regular heavy hitters. So character-driven, atmospheric readers who like philosophical, existential fiction. I truly think the same type of reader would gravitate, honestly, towards all three of my books.
Good.
I'd recommend this one to you. I know you have not read this one.
No, I read his other one, and I wouldn't be not even saying that. I'd like to read this one. I'll have to add it to my list for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Sounds crazy. I
can't imagine. It kind of dips into horror to some capacity.
Yeah, I'm sure. God, it's scary just thinking about it. All right. Well, that is it for this episode. Don't forget to follow the show on your favorite podcasting service and connect with us on Instagram at podcast_hisbook_herbook.
Yeah, you could tell us what your favorite isolation stories are. I had so many.
I know you guys have to have some.
So maybe we could do another isolation episode.
Me too. I have more. I could definitely have more. Let's talk about what we're reading right now.
Yeah. What are you reading? I know you're really loving what you're reading.
Yes. So I am reading Knock Knock Open Wide by Neil Sharpson. It's a horror sort of Irish Celtic myth story. Yeah, set sort of modern, but also not sort of modern.
You have me at Celtic Irish.
And Jackie, what's your current novel?
Well, I'm currently reading Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, but I also wanted to mention that I just finished The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
That's right.
And that is another book that would definitely fit into our theme of isolation.
Seriously, yeah.
Bleak isolation. I loved it. I was shocked by how much I loved it. I was actually dreading it a little bit going into that book just because I knew that it was going to be a bleaker tale. But yeah, absolutely loved it. My best friend's reading it right now. Yeah.
All right. And
what's next episode?
I like this actually. Next episode is
Humans are the monsters.
So I think that's going to be a good one.
So excited!
I have a lot
about
of choices.
This one. I think I might even add a nonfiction to the list. We'll see.
I don't think I've picked mine yet, but I have quite a few.
Yeah.
All right. So I hope you join us for that next episode. And until then, thank you for listening to His Book, Her Book.
Hopefully they become your books.
Bye.